So being a professional is not just saying somebody pay you to do the work. Of course, we know that. Like being a professional is how you conduct yourself on the job site. It's how you conduct yourself. It's the way that you plan the project. It's how you manage to keep integrity in your workmanship, right? And that means staying dedicated to quality and producing quality work, of course. So sometimes people make mistakes, and sometimes people cut corners. And I don't think that cutting corners is a mistake. I think this is an intentional thing that people do. And what I'm saying is that there are a lot of people who grow businesses on cutting corners. There's a lot of times where people, in order to stay in business or to maybe to keep uh, production costs low, they're willing to sacrifice quality or to sacrifice workmanship or craftsmanship. And then there are others who aren't. And I like to consider myself somebody who's not willing to sacrifice craftsmanship. I don't see the need to cut corners. But some of the things that people tend to do when they cut corners, some people will ignore safety, so they won't use PPE. And I think that that's cutting corners, and I think that that's you really cutting your life short, and you're really doing a disservice to your future by not preparing yourself and protecting yourself adequately. So that's wearing masks when you're doing sanding or when you're spray painting, wearing a respirator, when you're using noxious chemicals, or when you're doing stripping and using strippers and different different solvents and stuff like that. Wearing gloves when you're painting, or when you're working with solvents, or when you're cleaning something. Because I don't we know this we don't like to think of paint as being toxic, but it is. It's a chemical, right? It's a whole bunch. It's a batch of chemicals that's created, and the idea for these chemicals are for them to absorb into surfaces. And paint absorbs through your skin. Your skin is extremely absorbent. So, it's only in your best interest to try to protect yourself the best way you can. And there's certain paints that are corrosive. You wouldn't want them to linger on your skin, and you wouldn't want the chemicals from some of these substances to leach into to be absorbed into your skin. So it's something to keep. I think that not using PPE is you cut in the corner, and you really working against your own future in the industry. So you want to make sure that you always protecting yourself first and protecting your environment. Putting down paper or putting down the drop sheet. Sometimes people will pour their paint, or they mix their paint right onto a floor, right on the floor. Using drop sheet sometimes is cutting the corner when you should be using masking paper, because the masking paper is going to be, we're going to fix it to the floor with tape, and we're going to fix it right above the area that we're going to be working in. In most cases, we're going to be covering the entire floor, especially if we're going to be painting ceilings. So using drop sheets, or using paper, and covering up areas, not doing so is cutting corners to me. If you're going to be painting a wall and you have switch plates and you have electrical sockets on the wall and light switches on the wall, and you want to decide you're just going to cut around the switch plates instead of taking them off, that's cutting a corner to me. To paint around the light switch, as opposed to taking a screwdriver and just twisting this switch plate off and taking it off and removing it, I think that that's cutting a corner. Sometimes, in some cases, not taking door handles off of doors before you paint them can be considered cutting corners. Sometimes there are cases where you can't remove the door frame. Sometimes you can't. I mean, the doorknob. Sometimes you can't take them off. You have to tape around them. That's the only way to get the job done. And in that case, I understand. But there are times when not doing it is, to me, considered cutting corners. When you're painting a ceiling, not taking down the light sconce, or not taking the light fixture off the ceiling, off the surface. I think that that's a corner that can be cut, that people do. Just not preparing your area adequately, to me, is cutting corners. People who they don't really mind the specifics of the material that they're going to be using. So, for instance, I think that people who put paint in the water, put water in their paint. I think that I think, for one, you're degrading the value of the material, so you're degrading the strength of the paint, and secondly, you're trying to make the material go a little bit further, I guess. But paints in North America don't need water added to them. most of the paints do not need water added to them. If you're looking to extend the open time, so you want to be able to not have the paint dry so fast, there's an additive that you can use for that, as opposed to using water. Water is a solvent. Water will make your paint dry faster, and it will reduce the quality of the material, and it'll also change the color of the material. So if you wanted a deep pale navy or a deep tricorn black, and somebody put a little bit of water, put water in the paint in order to make it last a little bit longer, then your tricorn black is not going to be tricorn black anymore. It's going to be a watered down, literally a watered down version of that color. So don't use water in paint. They have additives that you can put into paint that doesn't disrupt the color or the quality, and you'll get better service out of what you're doing with the material that you're using, as opposed to using water. Or sometimes people will try to paint before they will try to paint the second coat before the first coat is fully dry. In a need to rush, you have to let paint set up, tack up, skin over, and then dry to the touch. Once it's dry to the touch, then you have to let all of the stuff that's underneath finish settling and moving, and the skin will harden. You need to wait at a minimum. They tell you 4 hours, and that's a really good idea. If you can wait 3 hours, 2 or 3 hours for it to fully set up, and it's scuffable and sandable, then you may be able to put the second coat on in a day. But in most cases, if you're putting the paint on at the correct mill thickness, then you're going to need to wait about 4 hours for it to dry out, for you to sand it, for you to put the second coat on. And that's normal. But if you try to rush and just try to put it on, what happens is you'll mess the texture up of the first coat, and also the paint won't be dry enough. So if you had to do any kind of extra work, now you might run into issues where you have bubbles forming, or you have the paint not drying and it dries unevenly. Or you can pull the texture. Like I said, there are times when somebody tries to paint something the first coat and then it not all the way dry, and they try to paint the second coat, and the texture from the first coat, the paint is not fully dry. It'll pull and it will retexture the area. Now it looks weird, right? It looks like it's too much texture. You didn't allow the texture to set and the paint to set all the way. So it's important to wait between coats for the adequate amount of time for the paint to dry. Those things are extremely important. Just to finishing. Sanding in between coats. You have to sand before you apply your primer. You should be sanding after you apply your primer before you put your first coat. And you should be sanding again, scuff sanding again after your first coat before your final coat. You should be sanding each time before you apply material to a wall or to a surface. And the reason why you're doing that, for one, is to remove any debris, remove any rough spots, or remove any high spots on the wall, to level the wall out. And you're also going to create a cut for the wall. So the wall itself is a flat surface. If it's been painted before, that's a gleaming film. And so you have to scuff that film up, because in those little micro scuffs, those little micro fissures that you create on the surface, allows paint to settle and grab onto the new material. The new material allows that area, the new material, to settle and grab onto it. So it's called giving it teeth in our industry. So you got to give the wall some teeth. You got to give it something to grab onto and hold onto. So it's almost like a scratch coat if you were doing plaster, if you understand what that is. The same kind of principle, right? So that's what that is. So you got to make sure that the wall grab teeth. So you always got to be sanding in between coats. And then you don't ever want to leave, like sometimes, when people use a roller, they leave the little roller hairs or the fibers or the little trash and bits of shit that get picked up in a roller cage or in a roller bucket when they're painting. Or sometimes it's just, it's stuff that's on the wall that wasn't knocked down, and now that's collected. Sometimes your roller hits the ground accidentally and you pick up some dirt on your roller and you roll that onto a wall. And if you don't remove that stuff in between, like as you're painting, take it and just nick it and just wipe it on your shirt. That's where most of the stains from painters come from. Just picking stuff off the wall and just wiping it on the shirt and keep rolling. But you want to make sure that you sand in between coats so that you don't have those things on your final coat. The final coat should feel like a sheet on a bed. It should feel like a fresh sheet on a bed. It should be soft. It should be smooth to the touch. It shouldn't feel rough. You shouldn't feel like sandpaper, like your hand is going across sandpaper. That's lack of sanding. Your walls are going to feel like sandpaper if you don't sand them. So make your walls smooth. And that's an important thing. So some of the things that painters do, or sometimes, homeowners do, or D.I.Y'ers do to cut corners, it really shows in your finish. So avoid those types of things, and you'll have a better finish.